Breaking news, I think this is the end of Canada's.
But what just happened in the last 24 hours just made 2026 100 times even more worse.
Welcome to 2026, and if you thought inflation was going to alleviate at some point soon, I've got bad news for you. It's going to get worse in the near term.
Did you know that in the first day and a half of 2026, Canada's top 100 highest paid CEOs literally made the same amount of money it will take the average Canadian worker an entire year of work to make?
Mark Carney is asking you to give him money to help him build Canada in 2026.
Now even Fox News is warning people of massive price increases for 2026.
Remember that he already takes 42% of what you make every year.
In 2013, this country was ranked 5th in the world for quality of life. A decade later, we plummeted to 33rd.
2026 is being talked about like it's just another year. Like things will magically stabilize. Like if Canadians just hang in there a little longer, everything will be fine. But let's be honest for a second. For a lot of Canadians, life already feels heavy. And what's coming next doesn't look easier. It looks harder. Rent didn't suddenly become affordable. Groceries didn't drop back to what they were. Wages didn't catch up. And job security feels weaker than it has in years. People aren't worried about luxuries anymore. They're worried about basics. About whether their paycheck will stretch far enough. About whether they'll still have a job 6 months from now. About how much more expensive life can get before something breaks. And the scary part isn't just the numbers. It's the feeling that no matter how hard you work, you're still falling behind. This isn't about panic. This is about reality. Because when you listen to Canadians talk, really listen, you start to hear the same fears over and over again. And that's why 2026 isn't just another year on the calendar. For many people, it feels like a turning point.
Money to help him build Canada in 2026, but before you get tempted to take this very compelling offer and donate money to this nice man, remember that he already takes 42% of what you make every year. He's your biggest expense. To put it in perspective, from now until June 7th, he takes all your money, but after June 8th, you'll be able to keep the paychecks for yourself and maybe even eat.
Did you know that in the first day and a half of 2026, Canada's top 100 highest paid CEOs literally made the same amount of money it will take the average Canadian worker an entire year of work to make? The average Canadian worker makes about $65,000 a year. These people made that in a day and a half. That is how bad wealth inequality is becoming in this country. They are literally playing in our faces. And until we develop the collective class consciousness to actually do something about this, it's just going to keep getting worse.
I thought it was going to be worse in 2026 and 2025, but what just happened in the last 24 hours just made 2026 100 times even more worse. Now, you're probably wondering how or why, so let me explain to you. Watch this.
In other words, we'll be selling oil probably in much larger doses because they couldn't produce very much because their infrastructure was so bad. So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries, many of whom are using it now, but I would say many more will come.
So what does this mean for the Canadian economy? You see, our number one customer for our oil is the U.S. Now the U.S. controls Venezuela, which means they control the oil in Venezuela. And Venezuela is number one in oil reserves.
So around the world, all of the usual suspects, but the biggest of all, and this is according to various different sources, the biggest of all is Venezuela.
I think like $13 trillion worth. Do you think the U.S. is going to need Canadian oil anymore? They don't need it. Before Carney had leverage, we had leverage because of our oil, but now the U.S. doesn't need our oil. They have control of the largest oil reserve in the world. So what does that mean for our Canadian economy? We're even more. Now, for those that don't study the global markets or is involved in the global markets, you have no clue what's going to happen to this country economy in 2026. No clue. And it's going to hit us hard. Man, this is not good news for Canada, its people, our economy. That's why you gotta have a backup plan.
Now even Fox News is warning people of massive price increases for 2026. I just saw an article about it like 2 or 3 days ago. Of course, they won't say why, but we already know why. The reason why we didn't quite see those massive price increases over the past 6 months that all of those Nobel Prize-winning economists were warning us were going to happen due to tariffs, this administration's economic policies, isn't because the experts were wrong. It's because even the corporations of America had their doubts about if these tariffs were going to last because Sir Flip-Flop changed his mind every 5 seconds about the tariffs. Now they're being challenged in court. They threw a Hail Mary and decided to front load a ton of goods, which means ordering them all ahead because it was cheaper to store them rather than pay the tariffs on them later. And now they're running out of goods. Some of them even doubted this man so much that they absorb some of the tariff costs, which obviously isn't a sustainable business model because we have to pass those costs on to consumers. Now what we're about to see is going to be a mirror of what happened the first time we implemented tariffs in the 1930s, which we know were catastrophic and greatly contributed to the Great Depression. So yeah, history may not be repeating itself, but it certainly does rhyme, and yes, you do need to prepare for higher prices in 2026 because they're coming.
Canada is objectively broken. In 2013, this country was ranked 5th in the world for quality of life. A decade later, we plummeted to 33rd. That kind of drop isn't a blip, it's a collapse. And unfortunately, Canada's decline hasn't hit bottom yet. According to the OECD, Canada is projected to be the worst performing advanced economy in the world for the next 40 years. We already pay nearly 50% of our income in taxes. Our healthcare system just ranked dead last in access to primary care, 10th out of 10. We're in the middle of one of the largest housing bubbles in history, with prices expected to rise over the coming years. And our food banks can barely keep up with the number of people who can't afford to feed themselves. This isn't just mismanagement, it's deliberate sabotage. If you asked me to design a blueprint for national decline, I wouldn't change a single decision our political class has made over the past decade. And while I don't advocate hopelessness, I do advocate honesty. It's no different than someone who's obese. They don't correct course by standing in the mirror and telling themselves health comes at any size and then making all the same decisions that got them there. They get healthy by admitting their habits have caused harm and making radical changes. The same applies to a nation. Denial might feel good in the moment, but it guarantees collapse. Right now, Canada is a house on fire. And I'm not the kind of person who believes that any political party is going to show up and put it out. In fact, the most helpful thing a government can do is step aside and stop making things worse. I don't need a government to solve my problems, just one that stops creating them. We're not beyond fixing this, but destruction is always faster than growth. And if the current government is allowed to keep swinging like a wrecking ball for another 4 years, we won't just find the edge of that cliff, we'll go over it. Most people think national decline is linear, that it happens slowly and predictably, but that's not how collapse works. Decay happens the same way people go bankrupt, slowly, then all at once. We need to recognize the moment we're in. If we don't, Canada won't just decline, it will crumble. Do we really believe that we're immune to the same historical forces that brought down every great civilization before us? The Roman Empire ruled for centuries and still fell. Egypt was once the pinnacle of power and innovation. Now it's a tourist attraction where people come to marvel at what's left of its collapse. Why do we assume Canada is somehow exempt? The so-called Dark Ages weren't just the result of plagues and poor weather. They were defined by population collapse, economic dysfunction, and waves of destabilizing migration. It doesn't have to be this way. Human beings, when left free, are capable of extraordinary things. But if we allow ourselves to be dragged down by collectivist mediocrity, by people who fear independence, resent excellence, and thrive on control, then yes, collapse is inevitable. History doesn't guarantee our survival. Only courage, clarity, and action can do that.
And when you hear people say they're struggling, it's not because they made reckless choices. It's because the cost of simply existing keeps going up. Rent is eating up more than half of people's income. Groceries feel like a guessing game every time you walk into a store. Utilities, insurance, transportation, everything costs more except paychecks, and the job market doesn't feel stable either. Layoffs, contract work, restructuring. Even people with good jobs don't feel safe anymore. What you're hearing isn't complaining, it's anxiety. It's people realizing that the system they were told to trust is getting harder to survive in. And when enough people start feeling that pressure at the same time, it changes how an entire country feels.
Breaking news, I think this is the end of Canada as we know it, since we now know that the United States control Venezuela's gas and oil, the biggest reserves in the world, especially crude oil. Canada has lost its leverage. Our biggest client and our biggest revenue for crude oil was the United States. And now that he is in control of it, well, he has every single power he needs to renegotiate CUSMA. This means the Liberals and Mark Carney have failed us and probably has lost us our freedom in the sense of being Canadian. Great. Good job.
These are my predictions for Canada in 2026, Part 2. First up, we got bribes at traffic stops or the border. This is something that you see a lot of in third world countries, and in 2026, it's still going to be something that you see a lot of in third world countries. Number 2, we have the boomer warhawks. We've already seen this with the Ukraine war. These people spent their entire lives criticizing the Iraq war, and then they were just like, we must help the Ukraine. Well, not me. We have to help. And I see a soft launch for this on CTV and the CBC. If you hear your mom start saying stuff like, I'm boycotting Venezuela, or your dad is like, the Iranians don't let their women get third trimester abortions, something's gotta be done. Number 3, the boomer awakening. I could see 2026 being the first time ever that a boomer has listened to her friend shout about Donald Trump in the local coffee shop, and she just said, know what? I don't give a God's green damn about Donald Trump. I care about my country and the future of my children. And their friends like, oh, I don't care about Donald Trump either. And then this will spread a chain reaction across the boomer communities of Canada. Don't bet big on this one. You know, this is a long shot. You have an extra $10, well, you won't have $10 lying around, but if you find a loaf of bread on the ground, offer it to your bookie. If this one hits, he'll give you a castle. Number 4, this one's for the boys. White women get their first taste of DEI. And I know the first time you hear a white lady say, it's the 55th interview. They just keep saying, we're not hiring white women candidates at the moment. I don't know what I'm gonna do. It's gonna feel really good. A lot of us have been pushed out of our professions or the things we love since around 2010, right? So really soak it in. But remember to keep it classy. Oh, and number 5, with Mark Carney frequently talking about expanding and building up our military, I think what they're probably gonna do is have a big parade. And we saw this in America last year. If it's not gonna look scary, don't do it. They're marching out of time, they're looking in the sky, there's one Humvee, just cancel the parade. I'm not going to be in the parade, but if the American one was that funny, you do not want to miss the Canadian one. I will definitely be there. Number 6, this one's not a prediction. This, of course, is a liberal majority. And you know, it's Christmas. Give Michael Ma and the next person to cross the floor a bit of a break. You know, what would you say if a WEF goon came up to you and said, life and money or death? I'm taking the money. Those are my 2026 predictions for Canada, Part 2. Merry Christmas to everyone except David Eby, Michael Ma, and anyone who left a stupid comment in Part 1. I hope you sprain an ankle.
What makes 2026 feel different is that Canadians are running out of room to adjust. You can only cut back so much. You can only downsize so many times. You can only budget better when the basics are already expensive. And a lot of people are quietly grieving something. The idea of stability. The idea that if you worked hard, life would slowly get easier. Instead, it feels like every year demands more and gives less back. People are delaying families, giving up on home ownership, putting dreams on pause just to stay afloat. And when an economy starts squeezing people emotionally, not just financially, that's when the stress really shows up.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I made a bunch of economic predictions, and one of the predictions was that we were going to experience inflation and that it was going to come in waves. And it comes in waves for a variety of reasons. But the first thing that we had was that people couldn't work in certain areas, and that led to inflation. We had disruptions in transportation, and that led to inflation. But we also had a loss of population because people died, people got sick, people stepped out of the workplace. We've also got the baby boomers who had been hanging on, and most of them stepped out of the workplace at the beginning of the pandemic, no longer working. So we ended up with a labor shortage. Now, what did we do in Canada? in Canada, recognizing that we had a labor shortage and to try and control this price increase that comes from a labor shortage. And the mechanism there is essentially this. You're short people working in your plant, in your factory, in your field, in whatever business you've got. And so in order to attract people to get them in, you have to increase wages. May not be a lot. You know, you're always trying to keep it low because you're trying to keep your prices low at all times because you want to be able to compete with the other company down the road that's producing the same thing, and they're trying to keep their prices low. So there's always a mechanism, the invisible hand of the marketplace, trying to keep prices low. But when wages are going up, you will see the prices go up because every company is trying to continue to make profit at some point. And larger corporations are looking at the other large corporation. They're all saying, well, we want to make our certain margin. So when wages go up at the bottom, when there's a shortage of people at the bottom, there's a shortage of product, right? And prices go up. So that's the supply and demand aspect of it. When there is a shortage of labor at the bottom, you've got to increase the wages for the labor. So we experience price inflation at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've experienced it in waves through the pandemic. Now, one of the problems with inflation is that it is really hurtful. Like every one of us feels it. We feel it in our pocketbook. And this is the time that we actually start looking to our government, where we're thinking to ourselves, how is the government failing us that we are experiencing inflation such as we are? There's always inflation, right? A bottle of Coca-Cola isn't 25 cents and hasn't been since I was very small. There's always inflation. But some things go up and some things go down. You know, at the end of the period when we used VCRs were $50, and when they first came out, they were $1,500. So there's always prices changing, but there's always inflation. But when we have extreme inflation, like we've had in the last couple years, since the pandemic, people look at their government and they say, what is the government doing wrong? And this is how governments get turfed. And in the US and Canada and around the world, the first things that happens usually is people start looking around also at their neighbors and saying, why are these people making the prices go up? And so in Canada, from time to time, I see some sort of racism evolves or develops. It had been against Chinese immigrants because of house prices in BC. It had been, in the last few years, there's been a lot of racism expressed against people who have come and are working at low-paying jobs at Tim Hortons, for example, and you see these comments on the internet, and that is really like the frothing racism below that is leading people to because they don't understand how their world works, and so they start blaming other people. And that is how Trump got elected, right? Because his whole shtick was mass deportations, and this is mass deportations of people that the people who voted for Trump don't want in their country because they're different, right? They're just, they speak with an accent or their skin color is different, and of course they blame them for taking jobs. Well, what happens when those people are taken out of the economy? You take those people out of the economy, you experience inflation because now there is a drive, a pressure on wages at that point at the bottom end. Now, companies can't absorb those those shocks to the economy and wage shocks essentially for forever. They're going to increase prices, and we've seen a lot of business-to-business price increases in the last little while. I've experienced it myself because, of course, I'm running a distillery on top of running a law office. But the business-to-business price increases are often absorbed for a while, but then eventually, of course, the price starts to go up as a result of the fact that each business that's competing with each other is looking at the other business and saying, okay, well, we have no choice but to increase our price. And they see that the price went up and they say, oh my gosh, we had no choice to increase our price. Thank goodness our competition just increased our price. We're going to increase our price, and maybe we can still hang on to the same market share. Now, juicing this whole thing is the tariffs. Even in Canada, we are paying the tariffs to some extent. So, Trump has said that the selling country is paying the tariffs. That's not true. It's the importer pays the tariff. It's a tax on the import. But so much of what we get in Canada is tariffed going into the US before it comes to Canada. So if you're buying some shampoo, for example, some of those inputs are coming from China. They're going into being paid by the US importer. And then when that product is imported to Canada, we are paying the tariffs sort of third party. So the US importer, the company that's manufacturing that shampoo, stick with that example, is paying the tariffs on those imports coming in from India, from China, whatever it is, the chemicals they're using, the bottles they're using, the packaging they're using. They're paying tariffs on all of those things. And then that product is being produced, manufactured, bottled, whatever in the States, then it's coming to Canada. Now, we're not paying a tariff at the Canadian border for it to come into Canada, but we are paying the American tariff. So yes, there is a portion of that tariff money is being covered by Canadian consumers. And I'm sorry to say that is just part of the process here. But tariffs, juicing prices, increasing prices. Tariffs in the US are going to drive prices up. We've seen it happening, but because the B2B, the business-to-business tariffs have been largely absorbed up until now, I can tell you that we've been insulated from it to some extent, and we're going to start to really feel it in the next few months. But it may be hidden to some extent because we've got massive changes in the economy that, again, are results of these waves that are still coming out of the pandemic. We cut immigration significantly in British Columbia, or in Canada rather, because basically, as I say, it's anti-immigrant sentiment that has led to this, and the government has responded by cutting immigration. In the US, they have mass deportations. Well, what has this caused? It's caused labor shortages, and it's caused a drive on prices going up because they have to pay higher wages to attract people for those jobs, and they're not producing as much as a result of the fact that they don't have the people to produce it. So supply and demand, because the demand is there but the supply is lower, the price goes up. So this is a result of deporting people and not bringing immigrants in, and of course Trump's tariffs, all working together to force prices at the bottom to go up. Now, companies will try for a while because they're competing. This isn't a greedflation thing, okay? This has been very often, people have been saying, well, this is just corporations trying to make as much profit as possible. Yes, the corporations are trying to make as much profit as possible, but the mechanism of keeping the prices down in the competitive market still exists. It's just that everybody is facing the same pressures, and that is what is leading to this. Now, it's going to be hidden. You're not going to see it as well as you might hope in statistics. And why is that? Well, because there's adjustments happening. So fuel prices are down. That's not helping the inflation aspect, although the Conservatives said that would in Canada. Fuel prices are down, and real estate prices are down, and are going to be down. Why? Because there isn't the demand, because the people are gone. They've deported so many people from the US that real estate prices are going to be deflated for a long time in the US. In Canada, we're seeing a decrease in real estate prices because why? There's not the demand. We've got empty houses now, a rare occasion in certain places in this country where we've got more supply than we have for demand. So you will see a reduction in property prices, which is going to give an artificial result in the numbers when they come out on inflation. But mark my word, over this next quarter, right at the beginning of the year, you're going to see significant inflation on consumer goods, all those things that hit your pocketbook. And as I say, that is bad for the political, the politics generally, because people just blame the government for it. That's how Trump got elected in the US, was just blaming inflation. He's done nothing to correct it. And we nearly ended up with a nightmare conservative government in Canada, which would have been horrible on the basis of that same concern. So I'm very concerned, and you should be too. You're going to feel the inflation in the next little while. It's going to really start to hit. It's going to be worse than you've seen, I suspect. This is one of those bad waves, and it's all as a result of the pandemic and decisions made since then, leading to where we are now.
This is why so many Canadians are looking at 2026 with dread instead of hope. Because it doesn't feel like a reset year. It feels like a continuation of pressure. An economic downturn doesn't just show up in headlines. It shows up in kitchens and late-night conversations, in the quiet stress people carry when they check their bank account and try to do the math again. Rent going up isn't just an inconvenience. It decides where people can live, how far they commute, whether they feel safe or settled. A weak job market isn't just about employment numbers. It's about confidence, about whether people feel secure enough to plan their future. And grocery prices, those hit everyone, every single week, no matter who you are. What makes this especially hard for Canadians is that many people did what they were supposed to do. They went to school, they worked hard, they played by the rules, and yet life feels more fragile than it did a decade ago. There's a quiet exhaustion spreading. Not dramatic, not loud, just constant. It's the feeling of always being one unexpected expense away from stress, one rent increase away from panic, one job change away from uncertainty. And when people feel that way long enough, it changes how they see their country, their future, and themselves. This doesn't mean Canadians are weak, it means they're being stretched. Stretched by rising costs. Stretched by economic uncertainty. Stretched by a sense that stability is becoming a luxury instead of a baseline. And maybe the hardest part is feeling like this struggle is happening quietly, like everyone is dealing with it individually, even though it's clearly collective. So when people talk about 2026 being worse, they're not predicting doom. They're reacting to momentum. Because unless something truly changes, the pressure keeps building. And the question Canadians are really asking isn't, will 2026 be harder? It's, how much harder can life get before something gives? If you're feeling this way, you're not alone. And if these concerns sound familiar, it's because millions of Canadians are quietly thinking the same thing. So the real conversation isn't about fear, it's about honesty. And maybe it's time we start having more of it.